Hi, it's Wednesday. That means it's time for another video edition of Widower Wednesday. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower, and today I'm going to share a happy widower story with you. Had the opportunity last week to go to a funeral of a remarried widower and learn some things about him and his family that I want to share with you. It's a great story, especially one if you are married to a widower or hoping to marry the widower you're dating, and especially if you have adult children who are maybe opposed to dad marrying again, or just a lot of the issues that come with blending families or that come with adult children. I hope this story's for you, and I hope you get a lot out of it. So I had a neighbor who was in his 80s, and he passed away about 10 days, 2 weeks ago. Passed away unexpectedly. He wasn't sick or anything, but passed away. And I had known him for a couple of years. I wouldn't call us like great friends, but we were acquaintances. Had spent some time at his house and had got to know him. I did know he was a remarried widower, and his wife had read Room for Two and had thanked me for writing the book. She said she found it insightful and useful. But that was just, again, it was nothing that we talked about. We didn't have any conversations with him. I just knew, just from him mentioning once that his wife had died and he had remarried. So it wasn't like we spent a lot of time discussing widower issues or anything like that. As far as I could tell, he was happily married. This was his second wife here. He was happily married. Seems like they had a good life, a pleasant guy. Had been married for, I want to say, 13, 14, 15 years, something like that. So, obviously a pretty solid second marriage there for both of them. She was divorced, by the way. She wasn't a widow, but she was divorced. But anyway, so I had a chance to go to his funeral last week. And it got me, and going to the funeral, I wasn't really thinking about the fact that he was a widower who remarried. It wasn't until people started telling stories at the funeral and talking about it that all of a sudden, it just clicked with me. It's like, oh yeah, this guy, he's a remarried widower, and it was interesting to see the perspective of his second wife and his kids and her kids on this whole widower issue thing. So that's what I'm going to highlight, here is that part of the funeral. I want you to keep in mind this was a great funeral. It was a happy event. The man had lived a good life. He had lived to an old age. So I'm focusing on maybe, a subject matter that was 5% of the funeral. Most of the funeral was not spent on this topic. They really talked about his life and the good example he was, and just the kind of man he was, which is, I think the kind of funeral most of us want. If people are going to go there and remember us, they don't want us to focus on one aspect of our lives. They want to just talk about the great life we had and the great example we were. So I'm focusing on issues here that were just small parts of the funeral, but obviously they stood out to me, and I thought I'd share them because I think there's lots of people that are married to widowers, and there's just these issues with blending families and adult children, and I think you can maybe get some insight from some of the stories that were told. And also I think it will give you hope that it is possible to marry a widower and have the adult children be okay with it and be supportive of the marriage and of the relationship, though it might, for some people, take a little change in perspective. Anyway, the funeral was going on, and the second wife's daughter kind of read a life overview, and it was just your standard life overview. He was born here. Here's some of the jobs that he worked. Married his first wife. The first wife died. He married my mom, and it was just kind of an overview. And it wasn't until the end of that she kind of stopped and just said, I'm so grateful. And this is the wife's daughter. So his second wife's daughter is saying this. Clear as mud, right? So anyway, so his second wife's daughter, and she's, I don't know, she's probably my age, in her 40s or something like that. And she, after she read this kind of life overview of her stepfather, she kind of stopped and said that she was so happy that her mom had married this man. And she talked about how happy that he made her mom, and that how he provided kind of a father-grandfather figure that her family had been lacking for a long time. And she just she spoke highly of her stepfather and just what a great person he was and how happy she was that that her mom had married him, and that I kind of my ears perked up at that, and I think it was interesting to see that she was happy at that, and she was happy that their mom was able to be happy, and then anyway, after kind of that life overview, one of the widower's daughters spoke. I think I want to say he had two daughters. Anyway, one of the daughters spoke, and again, she's talking about all these she has these great stories about her dad, and she's telling stories about her dad. And then about maybe 2/3 of the way through through the talk she was giving about her father, she mentioned how devastated her dad was when her mother died, and just how it just took a she goes I guess her mom passed away right before the holidays, so they went through Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's and such. Without their mom, and she'd go visit her dad. You could just tell that her dad was just completely devastated, that the loss was great, and just how sad he was. It was just she mentioned it was just like a different person. But then she said how happy she was that her father was able to fall in love again, and that he was able, to be happy again. And she talked about how the whole family, his whole family, embraced their stepmother, and just how wonderful it was, and how happy she made her dad. And she thanked her stepmom, at the funeral, said, "Thank you for, giving my dad many happy years, and he was happy with you, and and we're so glad that you're part of our family," kind of thing. And it just, again, my ears perked up at that. And I think it goes to show, again, I don't know the history. I don't know like when their dad first married. And by the way, he remarried quickly. After his first wife died, I want to say, off the top of my head, he married 12, 13, 14 months after his late wife died. And so, it was fairly quick. It was kind of like me. I married 15 months after, but it was a fairly quick turnaround. And, I don't have the whole story here. I don't know if his kids were like, "Dad, you're moving on," whatever. But from the words I got at the funeral and the kind things they said about his stepmom, I don't think they were, completely upset, or the fact that their dad had remarried. In fact, they seemed happy, and they seemed, to understand that their stepmom gave their dad lots of joy and happiness. And like I said, they were married for whatever 13, 14 years, and they had a good, happy marriage. And the fact that they were able to say that at the funeral, I think speaks volumes. She also told a story that I didn't know. I didn't know how the widower had met his second wife, but she told the story about how it was Valentine's Day. This was the first Valentine's Day after the widower's wife had died, and so we're talking 4 months. I think his wife died in November, so we're talking about 4 months after that. It was Valentine's Day, and he was lonely. And he realized that there were other people in the neighborhood that were experiencing Valentine's Day alone. And so what he did is he went to the supermarket and bought, I don't know, 30 roses. And he went around to all these people in the neighborhood that, whatever, were divorced, were single. Didn't matter if they were a guy or, a man or a woman, but he bought like 30 roses and went around to every door and knocked on their door on Valentine's Day, and just wished him a happy Valentine's Day, and said, he didn't want him to be alone on Valentine's Day. And one of the doors he knocked on was the woman who would eventually become his second wife. And so, anyway, I thought it was a great story, one where, instead of looking inward, and I think it kind of shows that the kind of man that this person was, that on Valentine's Day, instead of looking inward and feeling bad about himself, he looked outwards to others. And the goal of looking outward to others, he wasn't looking for a date, or he wasn't looking for a wife. He was just trying to make people happy. But his act of service was one that eventually led to a relationship with the woman that would become his second wife, and again, a happy marriage. From what I could see from knowing them and from the funeral, a happy marriage for 13 or 14 years. So I think if you want to put a moral in the story, is that there can be a second happy chapter for all people involved, not just for the widower and his new wife, but for the kids involved if it's something that they want. I think if you look outside yourself, and you can see that how happy. So if you have a dad that's a widower and he's dating or remarried or whatever the story is, I think if you look outside yourself and really give an objective look at your father, and is he a happier person now that he's in a relationship? Is he a better person now that he's in a relationship? Is he more like his old self that he's in a relationship? And I think if you can answer those questions affirmatively, it's probably a good relationship. So if you're struggling with that, my suggestion is to maybe take a step back and ask yourself if if your father would be better off or happier if he wasn't in a relationship. And for those who are on the other side, if your mom is dating a widower or married to a widower and there's whatever issues or problems there, I would ask those same questions. Is your mom better off in this relationship, or is she not better off? And again, use some objective standards here. I think look outside yourself and your own wants and needs, and look at it from your mom's perspective and see what she says. Anyway, the one final note I do want to add to this, I was able to go to the burial service, and the widower was buried next to his first wife. I don't know, again, if that was an issue in the marriage. The second wife didn't really seem to care. She was, I guess, all things considered, she was upbeat and positive at the funeral and at the burial. And so again, I know sometimes that burial issue is a big deal. And by the way, I didn't ask. I'm not that close. And maybe if it comes up in conversation, I'll do an update video. I did not ask, what her plans were, or if she was going to be buried in the same plot, or whatever, cremated. I didn't get into that. That wasn't the time or the place. Maybe one day I'll get into it with her, if the opportunity presents itself. But I do want to point out that he was buried with his first wife, and his second wife seemed happy with it. Didn't really seem to have an issue with it. She had lots of support there from both sides of the family. I think it was overall a good funeral. So, point of this whole story is I think there could be a happy second chapter in people's lives if it's something that you want. Look outside yourself. Don't deny other people. Your mom or your dad happiness with a new relationship. Not all relationships are perfect, I get that, but I believe a lot of relationships can be, and there's nothing better than having a second chance at love and having a second chance of being happy again. I'm Abel Keogh, author of the book Dating a Widower. Feel free to subscribe or share your own stories below, and I will see you next Wednesday.